The mysterious distress signal. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly in all directions, but Captain Xylox of the Norkel Empire had no time to admire its eerie beauty. His warship, the Zircon, once a fearsome force in the galactic battlefield, now drifted like a wounded beast. Plasma burns covered its hull, deep cracks spread along its structure, and half of its weapons were offline. The engines sputtered, barely holding enough power to keep them from spiraling into the gravitational pull of a nearby planet. They had fought hard, but the battle against the Ralzik fleet had left them in ruins. The captain clenched his jaw, his violet eyes scanning the dimly flickering control panel in front of him. They were losing power fast, and if they didn't find a way to repair the ship, they would be nothing more than space debris within days. Then the ship's AI detected something strange. A distress signal, weak, old, but definitely coming from the surface of the planet below. That made no sense. The planet was classified as undeveloped, a world untouched by interstellar civilization. Scans revealed no energy signatures of advanced technology, no evidence of shipyards, no sign of a species capable of assisting them. Just mountains, forests, and settlements too primitive to be of any use. And yet the signal was there, repeating in an ancient pattern, as if calling to something or someone. Xylox growled under his breath. He had no choice. If they stayed in space, they would die. But the idea of asking help from a backward species made his stomach turn. The Norkel Empire was the pinnacle of intelligence, conquest, and domination. It was their destiny to rule, not to beg. But a ruler who refused to see reality was a fool. His pride would not fix his ship. He turned to his second-in-command, General Vrock, the massive warrior, his crimson armor reflecting the dim emergency lights, stood like a living statue. His voice was deep and harsh. "Captain, if we land, we risk exposure. If the inhabitants are hostile." Xylox cut him off. "They are primitives. If they have anything of value, we will take it. If they resist, we will burn their villages to ash. The only thing that matters is getting the ship repaired." With that, the Zircon began its descent. As it broke through the atmosphere, the ship's sensors struggled to make sense of the readings. Something about the planet was off. It wasn't just primitive. It was strange. The air carried electromagnetic disturbances that interfered with their instruments, and the gravitational pull fluctuated slightly, as if the very fabric of the planet shifted at will. And yet, the closer they got to the ground, the clearer the signal became, guiding them toward an isolated village nestled between towering mountains and dense forests. The ship landed with a shudder, kicking up dust and scattering wildlife. Xylox and his crew disembarked, weapons in hand, ready for anything. What they saw next made them pause. A group of humans stood waiting for them. But they were not afraid. They did not cower or run. They stood calmly, as if they had been expecting the aliens all along. An elder, his dark skin marked with intricate symbols, stepped forward with an amused smile. His eyes, deep and knowing, locked onto Xylox's with an intensity that made the Norkel captain uneasy. "Welcome," the elder said in perfect galactic standard, shocking the crew. "We have been waiting for you." The wind carried his words across the quiet village, and for the first time in his life, Captain Xylox felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. The primitive engineers. Captain Xylox had encountered many species across the galaxy, but never had he seen a group so calm in the presence of an Imperial warship. The humans stood before him without fear, their expressions unreadable, their posture relaxed yet deliberate. He studied them closely. These were not warriors, not scientists, not engineers. They wore simple garments made of natural fabrics. Their hands bore no weapons. Their village lacked any sign of advanced industry. And yet, the elder who had spoken in perfect galactic standard stood as if he held the power in this interaction, as if he already knew the outcome of their arrival. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. General Vrock took a step forward, his towering form casting a long shadow over the elder. "You understand our language. Explain yourself," he demanded, voice sharp like a blade. The elder did not flinch. He simply glanced at Frock, then turned back to Xylox. "You need repairs," he said, his voice steady, unhurried. "Give us 3 days." 3 days. Xylox narrowed his eyes. Arrogant. Impossible. The Zircon was a war-class vessel, built with alloys and energy cores far beyond what this primitive species could comprehend. Their best engineers back in the Empire would need weeks to restore full function, even with proper equipment. And yet, these humans, with their mud brick homes and wooden tools, were offering to fix it as if it were a common trade. Laughter erupted from the Norkel soldiers. One of them, a technician named Zorn, scoffed loudly. "You? Fix our ship? With what? Your sticks and stones." The humans remained unbothered. The elder turned to a younger man, a tall figure with strong arms and intelligent eyes. "Tund," he said, "begin preparations." Tund nodded, and without a word, walked toward the damaged ship. He ran his fingers along the hull, his touch gentle, almost reverent. The Norkel crew watched, some amused, others confused. What did he think he was doing? There were deep plasma burns on that section. No amount of scrubbing would change that. But then, something happened. The metal hummed beneath his fingertips. It was faint, barely perceptible, but the readings on the ship's scanners spiked for a moment. A flicker of power ran through the damaged hull before vanishing just as quickly. The crew's amusement faded. They exchanged uncertain glances. Had that been a trick of the light? A sensor malfunction? Xylox's jaw tightened. He had been in battle long enough to trust his instincts, and right now, they were screaming at him that something about these humans was not normal. The elder smiled knowingly, as if he could hear the captain's thoughts. "Your ship is unlike any we have seen," he admitted. "But all things, metal, energy, life, follow the same rules. Rules we understand." Xylox folded his arms, unwilling to show even a hint of curiosity. "If you can fix it, then do it. But if this is a trick, if you waste our time, you will suffer the consequences." The elder did not seem concerned by the threat. "A fair warning," he said, "but unnecessary." With that, the humans turned away and began their work. The Norkel crew, still skeptical, followed closely, watching for any signs of deception. What they saw made no sense. Tund and a few others walked to the edge of the village, where the earth was dark and rich. They knelt, pressing their hands to the soil, whispering in a language that did not match any known dialect in the Norkel database. The ground shifted beneath their touch. Slowly, as if responding to a silent command, raw metal began to rise from the earth, pure, untouched, free of impurities. The Norkel technicians gasped. This was not mining. This was extraction at an atomic level. Xylox's mind raced. This was impossible. To refine metal like this required high-energy fusion furnaces, specialized industrial processing, hours of complex work. And yet here it was, happening before his eyes. Within minutes, the humans had produced sheets of metal identical to the alloy used in the Zircon's hull. A soldier stepped closer, drawing his weapon. "This is unnatural," he muttered. Xylox agreed. This was beyond anything he had encountered before. Not magic, not illusion, something else. A mastery of physics and matter that no species should have at this level of development. He had assumed these humans were primitive, weak, insignificant. But now he was forced to ask himself a disturbing question. Were they primitive, or were they something else entirely? A scientist among his crew, Threx, knelt beside the extracted metal and pulled out a scanner. The device blinked rapidly, struggling to analyze what it was seeing. "Captain," Threx whispered, voice trembling. This is not just refined metal. It's perfectly structured. No impurities, no flaws. It's as if the material itself obeyed their will." Psylocke turned his gaze back to the elder. The old man was watching him, calm, patient, as if waiting for him to understand something important. The captain did not like that feeling. "Continue your work," Psylocke ordered, forcing his voice to remain cold and commanding. "But know this, if you betray us, if this is some kind of trap, we will not hesitate to wipe this village from existence." The elder only smiled. "Then let us hope you are wise enough to recognize a gift, and not turn it into a war." As the humans continued their strange, impossible repairs, the Norkel crew remained on high alert. But the more they watched, the more their confidence wavered. These people had no ships, no armies, no known technology. But they had something greater. And for the first time in his long, brutal career, Captain Psylocke felt the stirrings of something he never expected to feel toward an inferior race. Unease, a dangerous secret. Captain Psylocke did not like mysteries. In war, the unknown was dangerous, unpredictable, and often deadly. That was why the Norkel Empire relied on intelligence, strategy, and overwhelming force to eliminate uncertainty before it became a threat. Yet here he stood, watching a species that should have been inferior, performing feats that defied all logic. The humans had no visible technology, no advanced tools, no machines to aid them, and yet within hours they had extracted and refined metal stronger than anything in his fleet's armory. Within hours, they had begun reshaping the damaged hull of his warship with nothing more than their hands, their words, and their strange, unexplainable will. Something about them was wrong. General Vrock sensed it too. He stood beside his captain, eyes narrowing as he watched Tund and the others work. "This is unnatural," Vrock muttered, his voice low so the humans wouldn't hear. "We should kill them all. Take what we need. Leave no survivors." Psylocke didn't answer right away. His mind was too busy racing through the implications. If these humans were capable of manipulating matter at will, if they could command the very elements as if the universe itself obeyed them, then they were not just another primitive race waiting to be conquered. They were something far worse. He had to know the truth. That night, under the cover of darkness, he sent 3 of his best spies, silent, disciplined Norkel warriors, to observe the humans in secret. They moved like ghosts through the village, their bodies cloaked in the light-warping shields of their armor. Undetectable, invisible. Not even the most advanced surveillance systems in the Empire had been able to detect them before. But as they approached the humans, an unsettling feeling crept over them. The village was quiet. Too quiet. No animals made noise. The wind barely whispered through the trees. And the humans, they were awake. Tund sat on the ground, eyes closed, hands pressed to the earth. Around him, the other villagers did the same, forming a wide circle. They weren't speaking. They weren't moving. They were simply waiting. One of the spies, Zorak, crept closer, his armor making no sound, his presence completely undetectable. He raised his scanner to take readings, but the device flickered and died. Electronics failure. That shouldn't have been possible. His gear was state-of-the-art, immune to interference. He frowned, trying to restart it. But then, Tund opened his eyes. They glowed, not with light, not with energy, but with something deeper, something ancient and unreadable. He turned his head, slowly, deliberately, staring directly at Zorak. The spy froze. He had been in countless battles, had faced death 100 times over, but never before had he felt such raw fear. It wasn't just the fact that Tund could see him. It was the feeling that Tund had known he was there before he even arrived. A whisper moved through the air, carried on the wind, though no lips had spoken. "You should not be here." Zorak tried to step back, tried to signal the other spies, but his body would not obey. The air around him had thickened, pressing in on him, wrapping around his limbs like unseen chains. The ground beneath him shifted. Slowly, deliberately, the earth swallowed his feet, then his legs, pulling him down, deeper, until only his head remained above the soil. He couldn't move. He couldn't even scream. His fellow spies saw what was happening and rushed forward, weapons drawn. But before they could fire, the villagers turned to them all at once. Hundreds of glowing eyes in the dark. The spies dropped their weapons, not because they wanted to, but because their hands refused to hold them. The metal of their guns melted, crumbling into dust, as if the weapons themselves had been unmade. Tund rose to his feet and walked toward Zorak, who was still half buried in the earth. He crouched beside him, tilting his head slightly, studying him the way a scientist might study an insect. "You come in secret," Tund said, his voice gentle, almost amused. "But secrets do not exist here." With a flick of his fingers, the earth released Zorak. The spy collapsed forward, gasping for breath. His fellow soldiers were shaking, their bodies betraying the terror that their training should have erased. "We do not harm unless we must," Tund continued, standing tall again. "But you misunderstand something, Captain Xylox. You believe power comes from war, from weapons, from control." He gestured toward the ground, the sky, the very air around them. "Power is not in battle. Power is in commanding what cannot be fought." At that moment, the Zircon, the great, mighty Norkel warship, flickered. The entire vessel vanished for a second, as if reality itself had rejected its existence. When it reappeared, the ship was changed. Better, stronger, but no longer theirs. The humans had taken it. Not with force, not with war, not with weapons, with will. Xylox, watching from afar, saw the impossible unfold. His warship was intact, but its systems no longer obeyed him. His men had weapons, but their hands trembled too much to hold them. His spies had armor, but no protection against whatever these beings were. For the first time in his life, Captain Xylox realized he had made a mistake, a terrible mistake. He had come looking for a weak, primitive species to exploit. Instead, he had found something far worse. A species so powerful they had no need for war. A species so advanced they chose to look primitive, to be overlooked, to be left alone. And now that he had seen the truth, he understood one thing clearly. The Norkel Empire had no chance against them, unless, somehow, they found a way to destroy them before it was too late. The ambush that failed. Captain Xylox could not sleep. The Norkel Empire had crushed civilizations, conquered entire star systems, and wiped out species who dared to defy them. He had always believed in one simple truth: strength decides everything. The weak existed to serve, to be ruled, to be eliminated if necessary. That was the way of the universe. But the humans shattered that belief. They had no warships, no laser cannons, no planetary defense systems, yet they had taken his ship without lifting a single weapon. They had trapped his men in the earth like insects caught in amber. They had rendered his technology useless, as if the very laws of physics bent to their will. That was not strength. That was something else, something worse. It had taken all of his discipline to keep his composure after retrieving his shaken spies. He had not punished them for their failure, not because he forgave weakness, but because he knew it had not been their fault. No training could prepare a warrior for what they had seen. But now, Xylox had decided. The humans had to die. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about pride. It was about survival. If a species like this existed, it was only a matter of time before they became a threat. Right now, they played the role of peaceful, primitive beings, but that could be an act. What if they decided to expand? What if they turned their strange power against the Empire? No, Xylox would not take that risk. The Norkel did not wait for threats to rise. They crushed them before they could grow. The plan was simple. That night, his best warriors would strike. They would move in the dark, cloaked in stealth armor, weapons drawn, assassinating the elders and leadership of the village. The remaining humans, without their guides, would be easier to control. If resistance continued, they would burn the settlement to the ground. It should have been easy. It was not. The attack began as planned. The warriors spread out through the village, their presence hidden, their breathing silent, their blades sharp enough to cut through bone with ease. Their helmets displayed no signs of life, no movement, no technology. The humans should have had no way of knowing they were there. But they did. Before the first blade could be drawn, the night itself betrayed them. The air thickened, pressing against the Norkel warriors like a weight dragging them down. Their limbs slowed, their lungs tightened, their suits flickered as if something unseen was draining the energy from them. The wind that had been still all evening roared to life, whipping through the village in chaotic bursts, carrying whispers that spoke no language but filled their minds with unbearable pressure. One warrior managed to move, his blade still in hand, and lunged toward one of the elders. But before the strike could land, his weapon disintegrated. Not burned, not shattered. It simply ceased to exist. The warrior stared in horror at his empty hands as his body froze in place. He wasn't paralyzed by any visible force. His mind screamed for his body to move, but his own muscles no longer obeyed him. All around, the same thing was happening. One by one, the elite Norkel warriors were rendered helpless. Some dropped to their knees, gasping for breath. Others collapsed, their suits failing, their strength draining away. None of them could fight. None of them could even move. Then the humans appeared. They had not been sleeping. They had not even been caught off guard. They had known. The elder stepped forward, his expression calm. The villagers stood behind him, unarmed, unarmored, unafraid. "You do not understand," the elder said softly, looking down at the frozen warriors. His voice was not mocking. It was not angry. It was simply disappointed. "You believe you are strong because you can kill, but strength is not measured by destruction." Tund, the young man who had helped repair the ship, knelt beside one of the warriors. His eyes glowed softly in the moonlight. He did not touch the soldier. He simply looked at him. The warrior screamed. He screamed not in pain, but in fear, because at that moment his mind was opened. His thoughts were seen. Every battle he had fought, every war he had taken part in, every crime he had committed under the name of the Empire, Tund saw them all. And the worst part, Tund did not look away in horror. He did not shudder. He did not recoil. He simply sighed, as if he had seen countless others like him before. "You mistake control for power," he said, his voice heavy with something ancient. "You believe that to command is to rule. But true control is not over others. It is over oneself." The elder placed a hand on Tund's shoulder. "Let them go." Tund blinked, and suddenly the warriors collapsed. They could move again, but their bodies were weak, trembling. The weapons they had brought were gone. Their suits had been drained of power. The fire of war in their eyes had been extinguished. Captain Silox watched all of this unfold from a distance, his hands clenched into fists. His warriors were defeated, not by weapons, not by numbers, by something far worse. He felt a deep, burning rage inside him, but even that was drowned by something colder, something he refused to name. The elder turned to him. "You may leave," he said simply. "Your ship is repaired. You have what you came for. But if you return with violence..." The air rippled. The ground trembled. The stars themselves seemed to shudder. "You will not leave again." Captain Silox stood frozen for several seconds. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, to attack, to make an example of these creatures. But he did not. He turned without another word and marched back toward his ship, his warriors staggering behind him. They had no weapons, no pride, no victory, only fear. For the first time in his long career, Captain Silox had lost without a single battle being fought. And as his ship lifted off into the sky, he realized something else. The humans had let them go, not because they were weak, but because they had already won. The truth about the humans. The Zircon was in perfect condition. That alone should have been impossible. When Captain Xylox and his surviving warriors returned to the ship, they had expected to find it exactly as they had left it, damaged, burned, barely holding together. Instead, it was flawless. The hull that had once been scarred with plasma burns was now seamless, as if the battle had never happened. The fractured circuits had been restored, the energy cores hummed with new life, and the engine output was even higher than before. It was better than new. Xylox should have been relieved. He should have been grateful that the ship was repaired without a single credit spent. Instead, his mind churned with one agonizing thought. What had they done to it? As the crew hurried inside, they ran every diagnostic possible. They checked the weapons systems, the shield integrity, the AI core. Everything was functional. No traps, no sabotage, no viruses in the system. Nothing had been altered. But that was the problem. It was too perfect. The ship functioned better than any Norkel engineer could have made it. Even the smallest flaws, the microscopic imperfections that all technology had, were gone. That meant one thing. Whoever had repaired it had complete and total mastery over matter itself. Xylox clenched his jaw, his mind a whirlwind of calculations. He had seen species with advanced technology, civilizations that could terraform planets, engineers capable of building entire cities in the blink of an eye. But every species had limitations. Every technology had weaknesses. The humans had shown none. He stood on the bridge, staring at the planet below. His warriors, once full of arrogance, now sat in silence, their eyes flickering with unease. Not one of them suggested going back. General Vrock broke the silence. His voice was quieter than usual, almost hesitant. "Captain, we should leave. Now." Xylox didn't answer immediately. He had never run from a potential conquest before. But this was not a conquest. It had never been. He had miscalculated. The humans had known from the start. They had not feared the Norkel. They had allowed them to land, allowed them to believe they were in control, allowed them to threaten, to test their strength, to attempt an ambush. And then, when the Norkel had finally realized the truth, the humans had let them go. Like a parent sending a foolish child away. Xylox had always believed in power. But power was a weapon, something to be used to dominate, to control. What the humans had was something else, something far worse. They did not rule with weapons. They ruled with knowledge. Knowledge so vast, so incomprehensible, that they had no need for war, no need for defenses, no need to strike first. They simply knew they would never lose. He looked at the planet one last time, a bitter taste in his mouth. Had the Empire ever really been the apex of the universe, or had they been children, playing with fire while true power watched from the shadows, unconcerned? Something about the thought made his skin crawl. He turned sharply. "Prepare for departure." The crew moved too quickly to obey. He could feel their desperation to leave. Even the warriors, the battle-hardened killers of the Empire, sat stiffly in their seats, their hands twitching over controls. They would not feel safe until they were light years away. The engines roared to life. The Zircon lifted into the sky, rising above the village, the forests, the mountains. The moment they broke through the atmosphere, the tension in the room lifted slightly. Then, without warning, the ship's alarms blared. "Report." Xylox snapped. The navigation officer's hands flew over the console, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Captain, the jump drive is unresponsive." A cold spike of dread pierced through Xylox's chest. "Explain." The officer swallowed. "It's not damaged. It's not hacked. It's just not responding." Xylox's fingers dug into the armrest of his chair. No, 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 no. They had let him leave. They had given back the ship. Had they changed their minds? The bridge went silent. Then a new voice rang through the ship's comm system, a voice that was not supposed to be there. "You may leave," the elder's voice said, calm and steady. "But understand this. The ship's power flickered, not just the lights, but everything. The artificial gravity faltered, the engines stalled for a fraction of a second, the weapons shut down and rebooted in perfect synchronization. Every single Norkel felt it. For one brief, terrifying moment, the ship did not belong to them. Then the power returned, the lights stabilized, the gravity settled. The ship was fine, but the message had been delivered. The elder continued, his voice carrying absolute certainty. If you return with war in your hearts, your weapons will fail before they fire. Your ships will stop before they reach our skies. You will not be allowed to harm us. Not now. Not ever. Silence. Then, softly, almost kindly, he added, "Go home, Captain." The comms cut off. Xylox exhaled slowly, his muscles coiled with frustration, with fear. He gave the order. Engage the jump drive. This time, it worked. The Zircon leaked into hyperspace, leaving the planet behind. But not the memories, not the warning. The crew said nothing. No one celebrated their survival. No one asked questions, because they already knew the answer. The humans had spared them, not because they were merciful, not because they were weak, but because they had never been in danger to begin with. The departure, and a mystery. The Zircon hurtled through hyperspace, the stars stretching into long streaks of light outside the viewing windows. But inside the warship, there was no sense of victory, no relief, only a silence so thick it felt suffocating. The crew moved with stiff, mechanical motions, their eyes vacant, their bodies tense with a fear they refused to acknowledge. Even the mighty General Vrock, the most ruthless warrior in the fleet, had not spoken a word since they left the planet. Captain Xylox sat in his command chair, his fingers drumming lightly against the armrest. He was not a man given to fear. He had led invasions on worlds where the air itself was poison, had fought against monstrous creatures that tore through steel with their bare hands. But this was different. The humans had done nothing to them. No battle, no visible attack, no show of aggression. Yet they had won completely. They had stripped the Norkel Empire of its greatest weapon, certainty. Before today, Xylox had believed in the Empire's supremacy. It was an unshakable truth. The Norkel had the strongest armies, the most advanced fleets, the most feared warlords in the known galaxy. But now, for the first time, he doubted. How many others like the humans existed? How many species did the Empire overlook because they did not seem like a threat? How many were watching, waiting, letting the Norkel believe they were in control? Until it was too late. He turned sharply to his science officer, Threx. "Run a full analysis on the ship's systems. I want every inch of it checked. Look for anything that wasn't there before." Threx hesitated before nodding. He was one of the most brilliant minds in the fleet, but even he looked shaken. "Understood, Captain. But so far, there's nothing unusual." Xylox narrowed his eyes. "That's exactly what concerns me." The crew obeyed. Scanners were deployed, deep system diagnostics ran. Every circuit was tested and retested. And yet, the results remained the same. Everything was perfect. The Zircon was functioning beyond its original parameters. Even the ship's weapons, which had been heavily damaged, were now running at 120% efficiency. Everything was better. But why? Xylox's thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of an incoming transmission. Not from the fleet. Not from the Empire. From nowhere. The bridge fell still. The transmission had no source, no origin. It wasn't on any known frequency, and yet it was there. "Open it," Xylox ordered. A crackling hum filled the room. Then a voice. Not the elder. Not Tund. Someone else. "You think you are free." It was a whisper barely above a breath, yet it echoed through the ship as if it came from the walls, the air, the very metal itself. "You believe you have left us behind, that you are beyond our reach." Xylox's heart pounded. The crew exchanged fearful glances. Who was this? You misunderstand, the voice continued. We are not behind you. We are not in front of you. A pause. We are everywhere. The lights flickered. The ship's artificial gravity shifted for a fraction of a second, as if reality itself had tilted sideways. Every control panel blinked with unreadable symbols for exactly 3 seconds. Then, everything returned to normal. Silence. Captain, Threx whispered, his voice hoarse. I just ran a full scan. No signals, no transmissions, no source. That voice, it wasn't coming from outside the ship. Thylox's blood ran cold. It came from inside. Every member of the bridge crew remained frozen in place. Some of them instinctively pulled away from their consoles, as if afraid the ship itself might reach out and grab them. Thylox clenched his fists. Are they still here? Threx shook his head, his face pale. I don't think they were ever here in the way we understand. The implication sent a chill through the room. If the humans were capable of communicating like this, across impossible distances, through methods that didn't even register on their sensors, what else could they do? The message had been clear. You are never beyond our reach. Thylox forced himself to take a slow breath. This was unacceptable. The Norkel did not retreat. They did not run. They conquered. But what did you do when faced with an enemy who did not see you as a threat? He turned to Vrock, expecting him to demand vengeance, to suggest an immediate counterattack. But for the first time in his life, the general had nothing to say. His hands were clenched at his sides, his gaze locked on the viewing screen as the streaks of hyperspace passed them by. He was afraid. Thylox had never seen fear in Vrock's eyes before. He leaned forward. We say nothing of this to the Empire, he said, his voice low, firm. No reports, no records. As far as they know, we landed on an insignificant world and left when repairs were complete. Vrock finally turned to him, his expression unreadable. And if they ask? Thylox met his gaze. Then we tell them nothing. The crew remained silent. No one argued. No one objected. Because they all understood. Some wars were meant to be fought. Some enemies were meant to be crushed. But some things in the universe were not meant to be challenged. And the humans, whatever they truly were one of them. For now, the Empire would remain ignorant. The Norkel would continue their conquests, their wars, their expansion. But deep in his mind, Thylox knew the truth. One day, someone in the Empire would make a mistake. Someone would return to that planet, or another like it. Someone would try to test the limits of the humans again. And when that day came, the Norkel would not just lose. They would cease to exist. Thylox exhaled slowly and leaned back in his chair. The whispers of the mysterious transmission still lingered in his ears. We are everywhere. For the first time in his career, Captain Thylox did what he had never done before. He gave the order to flee. The final lesson. Years passed. The Norkel Empire grew, expanded, and conquered, as it always had. New wars erupted, new planets were claimed, and new species were subjugated. To the rest of the galaxy, the Norkel remained as they had always been, ruthless, powerful, and unstoppable. But deep within the halls of command, among the highest-ranking warlords and admirals, there was a whispered truth, one that was never spoken aloud. There was a place they did not return to. There was a species they did not challenge. And there was a warning buried within the classified records of the Empire's most restricted archives. A report that did not exist, and yet all who mattered knew of it. A report that Captain Thylox had ensured would never reach the public, never be discussed, never be acknowledged. The humans. To the rest of the Empire, they were insignificant, barely worth mentioning. A backwater species with no fleet, no empire, no military power to speak of. They had no colonies, no expansion, no interest in conquest. And yet, for reasons that no one dared explain, The mighty Norkel Empire never returned to their world. But the universe was vast, and the Empire's thirst for domination was endless. As time passed, new leaders rose, ones who had not been there to witness the silent defeat of the Zircon. They saw only an empty planet, full of untapped resources. They saw a mystery that had no answer. And so, against all whispered warnings, they sent a fleet. Not just a scouting party this time. No, they would do what should have been done long ago. They would claim the planet. 12 warships, thousands of soldiers. Enough firepower to wipe out a world in hours. They arrived in full force, their weapons primed, their generals eager. The planet had changed little. Still lush, still covered in dense forests, still populated by humans who seemed completely unconcerned by the arrival of the fleet. The Norkel issued a single demand: submit or be destroyed. And the humans, they smiled and said, "Welcome back." The first sign that something was wrong came when the fleet's weapons refused to fire. It wasn't a malfunction. The systems were online. The targeting systems were locked. The commands had been given. But nothing happened. The second sign came when the soldiers found themselves unable to move. Not frozen by an external force, not paralyzed by an attack, but simply unable. Their own bodies would not obey. Their fingers twitched, their muscles strained, but they remained motionless, locked in place by something unseen. The fleet's engines failed. The comms went silent. And then, one by one, the ships vanished. Not destroyed, not attacked, just gone. No explosion, no debris, no trace left behind. One moment, they existed. The next, they did not. On the homeworld of the Norkel Empire, the High Command waited for news of their victory. Hours passed, then days. No messages came, no signals, no distress calls. The fleet had simply disappeared. At first, the Empire assumed a battle had taken place. Perhaps a hidden enemy had intervened. Perhaps a cosmic anomaly had wiped them out. But when they sent probes to the coordinates, they found nothing. Not even the wreckage of a battle. Only a single monolith, standing alone in the clearing where the first Norkel ship had landed long ago. It was carved from an unknown material, smooth and dark, untouched by time or wear. The symbols on its surface were not written in any known language, yet when the Norkel scientists looked upon them, they understood. A simple message: power is not in battle. Power is in control. The monolith was unbreakable. No weapons could scratch it. No force could move it. It remained there, silent and waiting. The Empire never sent another fleet. Not because they lacked the will, not because they lacked the firepower, but because, deep within the hearts of the highest warlords, there was an understanding. The humans had let them come once. The humans had let them leave once. But they would not be given a third chance. And so, the planet was erased from all Norkel records. Its name was forbidden to be spoken. Its location was never marked on any star charts. It was a void, a blank space in the Empire's dominion, as if it had never existed. But somewhere, beyond the edges of known space, there were those who still remembered. Those who had stood before the humans and understood what true power was. Captain Xylox, now old, long retired from war, sat alone in his private chamber, staring at the empty coordinates on the map. The place he had once been. The place he had once fought to conquer. He had never spoken of what had happened there. He had never warned them enough. And now, the new warlords had made their choice, and the Empire had paid the price. He closed his eyes. Somewhere out there, the humans were watching. Not as conquerors, not as warriors, but as something far beyond. And the Norkel, for all their arrogance, for all their might, for all their belief in strength, had never truly mattered at all.